Hello there my friends, on today's menu we have this 1:48 scale Tamiya M26 Pershing. Now this is a very interesting kit and it's also quite rare, they're not being made anymore. So I thought today we would make quite a special project with it and quite a unique one. As you can see here I have 3D printed parts that will help me convert it into a Super Pershing, which is something I haven't seen anyone do with this specific kit yet, so I thought why not be the first. Let's get right into it. As per usual, the assembly starts as any other kit. I start by snipping out the parts from the sprue with sharp-side cutters, and then I clean them up with my sharp hobby knife. However, this kit is a little different, not from other Tamiya 48 scale, this is quite common there, but from other scale models. This kit actually has a metal hull, which means I have to use some super glue to glue some bits onto it. However, Tamiya gracefully and mercifully, I must say, made the sides of the lower hull plastic, which means the metal hull won't make it more annoying to glue on the wheels and stuff like that, so I really like that. So here I used super glue, then I moved on to the rest of the plastic parts. Tamiya, their fitting is just as good as always. That has been proven to me by their Tiger that I have made a video on, and I must say I've gotten quite addicted to these 1:48 scale kits. They are amazing, and of course you even get a polycap, which is really useful because you can keep the tracks removable. Of course, while I sometimes neglect this on such a bigger model, it is important that you clean up the wheels. My go-to way of doing that is I just glue the two halves of the wheel together and then I clean it up instead of cleaning each individual wheel separately, because I would go insane that way. The assembly hasn't even started yet and I am already destroying stuff. This is something that I noticed on my references of the Super Pershing, the reference being War Thunder. It doesn't have the front parts of the mudguards, and I think it shows the wheels, or well, the tracks, in an interesting way, so I of course decided to remove them in a rather crude way, but I tried my best to clean the cut up. Of course the kit doesn't expect you to end the mudguard there, and therefore I created a fake thickness of it, because otherwise it would be too thick. I just scraped it a bit with my hobby knife, which made it look thin on the edge. I like having my tracks in a sort of single assembly just so it's easier to paint. Therefore what I do next is assemble the tracks in such a way that they're removable from the hull. So first of all I glue all of the single links. In this case it's actually two links in one. Thank you, Tamiya. I glue them around the sprocket and the idler wheel. Then I basically line the rear wheel with the first wheel on the main suspension. This is where the polycap becomes really helpful, because you can rotate the wheel until you're satisfied. And then using this as a guide, I start gluing the tracks all around the entire running gear. Of course I don't glue the wheels to the hull or anything like that, because I want to keep them removable. If the tracks are good quality, this is probably the best way to glue them together, in my opinion. And I tried gluing them together like this even on bad quality kits, as you will see in future videos, which ended disastrously, but here it went together really beautifully. Enough of the assembly, you can see that in any other video with this kit. Time to start working on the Super Pershing bits. Now these were printed out by my boyfriend, and I was the one that modeled them. If anyone is interested, I could put them up on my Patreon, where you could download them, but unfortunately this kit is pretty much not possible to get nowadays. So I could maybe make a conversion kit for the 72nd scale Pershing from Trumpeter, or just make my own Pershing in the future. I must admit, I did eye the pieces out, but they fit quite well considering that there were basically no measurements other than the real measurements of the real vehicle that went together pretty well. Since this is resin, I obviously had to use super glue to glue everything together, and it went pretty well. Also, have we all ever noticed that the Super Pershing has 2 layers of armor on the upper front plate? I mean, I noticed a while ago, but it's something interesting because I had no idea beforehand. So yeah, I obviously had to recreate that as well. I'm not going exactly off of the real Super Pershing because I'm doing a fictional camouflage, but per reference, as you might notice, the front headlamps were actually moved onto the mudguards instead of the upper front plate due to the additional plating. I don't know if this was done before the plating was added by the crew or if this was already done on the E4 variant of the Pershing basically, but I had to recreate it because it's a detail. To my surprise, even the main barrel actually fit perfectly into the hole on the mantlet. Well, I had to enlarge it only a tiny little bit, and of course I had to make sure that it is glued on straight. However, I have probably supported it not as good as I should have, which unfortunately resulted in the barrel being bent from its immense weight, because it's just so enormous. I mean, it's longer than the Tiger that I built in 48 scale as well. Once I glued together the turret and I put it onto the hull, it was starting to take shape, and I was starting to be really happy with it. I don't want to bother you with the rest of the resin bits, more or less. The frontal armor was just glued on. Of course there was scraping and I had to modify stuff because it wasn't made exactly precisely, which was probably a mistake, but oh well, we live and we learn. The springs unfortunately made it so I can't move the gun up and down. Otherwise, it would have had elevation and depression, since Tamiya included polycaps for the mantlet as well, but that's perfectly okay with me. To my annoyance, I have later found, or well, noticed that Super Pershing also has a different cupola for the gunner, and also has a counterweight on the back. That's something I haven't noticed because everything is painted the same color on the 3D models and the references, so I had to print this additionally. I could have printed the gun additionally, but I haven't noticed that it was bent, so oh well. I probably could have done this a little better, but yeah, I scraped off the cupola and I then added the new printed cupola. With all the printed bits being added in a pretty messy way, I must admit I haven't done the cleanest job. I decided to cover it all up with some armor texture. Hopefully this will help the model seem a little more unified, and also it'll bring more interest. After all, the turret was cast, and I also want to show that the additional armor parts are also sort of steel plates, because right now the resin makes them not really look like steel. Of course, the concoction that I used for creating the armor texture is Tamiya putty diluted with a Tamiya cement. This is a typical way of doing armor texture. I diluted it and then I stippled it on with a very stiff brush. Last thing I wanted to add were some welds. I'm still practicing how to work with these. It's really annoying to me. I really dislike doing them, but they should create some nice details on the model. So this is Tamiya 2-piece putty, the yellow and white one. What I did was basically roll it out into tiny little snakes or whatever, and I placed it where I wanted the weld to be. Now this wasn't as easy as it would look because it's really sticky. It would stick to everything, apart from the model where I wanted it to stick. This is my biggest issue with it. The way to avoid this is water, a lot of water. I basically let it sit in the water while I'm doing it on the model. I constantly have to dip my brush, the toothpick into water, my paintbrush that I used to move it around, everything just needs to be dipped in water so it doesn't stick. And it still sticks a lot, but it sticks less, but still sticks a lot still. So I just rolled it on and I added it to where I wanted the welts to be again. Once that was dry, using a toothpick and a sharp knife, I created the texture again, covered in water just so it doesn't lose everything and make everything worse than it already was, but it added some nice detail. I was decently happy with it, I think. So that took a long time, but finally we can start being a little more creative than destructive, I would say. I start priming the model with my black primer. I always prime my models with a black primer. This will unify all of the surfaces, which is especially important here because we have several surfaces: the plastic, the resin, the putty, everything. For the main color of the main tank, I used olive green from AK. The paint is literally called olive green or olive drab, one of the two. And I simply spray the entire model with very thin layers, building up the opacity until I am happy with how green the green is. Anyway, with such a big model, how could I not take the opportunity for some more detailed post shading? So I added a little bit of buff to the green and I started creating some post shading effects. Now, if you don't know what post shading is, this is one of my favorite methods because it makes the model look more three-dimensional. Essentially, the basis of the technique is creating highlights on highlighted areas of the vehicle. In my case, that means spraying towards the inner parts of the panel when it's a horizontal surface, and when it's a vertical surface, I spray towards the top. I continuously mix lighter and lighter colors, spraying them more towards the highlighted areas until I am happy with the result. I usually go for a very heavy contrast because I want the post shading to be visible after washes. As you can see, with the contrast push really high, the model looks way lighter, it looks nicely three-dimensional, and it's, I think it's pretty cool. Afterwards, I masked all of the green surfaces underneath the armor, and I decided to start spraying on the German three-tone camouflage. This is where the fictional camouflage comes in, because as far as I'm aware, the additional armor were simple boilerplates, but it was quite common and still is to hear that the armor is actually cut up Panther. I don't know where the truth lies. I think it's more likely that it's just a simple boiler. However, I do like the idea of the tank wearing enemy as its armor, so that's why I started spraying the German three-tone. I start with buff, then I go with, well, not buff, the Dunkelgelb, then I do red brown, and then I go Dunkelgrün, or olive grün actually. Didn't feel like masking anymore, so I sprayed on as a soft edge camouflage, and there is not a lot that I can explain here because it was just really simply quickly painted on. I will do other vehicles in this camouflage where I will explain this way better. After removing all of the masking, I was happy to see there was no overspray or anything like that, and the model looked, well, unique, that's for sure. There wasn't actually much detail to paint on this thing, so I just simply painted the main details in various grays and blacks. I used the black on the rubber and for the vision slits, for example. And all of the edges of the additional armors got a coat of silver. Due to quite a complicated assembly, I simply went for a very non-complicated paint scheme and everything. Using a dark brown enamel wash, I started outlining all of the details. The wash was diluted by an odorless thinner, and then it was added around all of the details into deep crevices. And also the thinner was then used to blend it around, but I diluted it in such a way that there was no need for any blending. I then started working on some chipping. This was done with a light grey and light green. Some people were really angry at me for this because apparently olive green didn't chip. So I guess I will keep that in mind for next time. But I guess any paint doesn't really chip on a real vehicle. This is just a way to bring more interest to it, in my opinion. So it's an artistic representation, I suppose. I added sort of silver chips and silvering to areas that would silver in real life. So, you know, stuff like the teeth on the sprocket, the clads that would make contact with ground on the tracks, and also around the welds and stuff on the additional armor, because I wanted to make it look like it's been cut with a blowtorch, and my basically first thing I did was make chipping all around the edges with silver. Detail I see often used on American vehicles is oil spilled around the oil cans, especially on Shermans, because it has one drain hole and every modeler uses it for a streak, which I will do as well. I'm not judging anyone, but I tried doing it here with black paint as well. I then used the black around the cut areas to create sort of burnt effect. I added some rusty chips. Those received a rust streak enamel wash from AK again, and I just added it onto the rust and then blended it around with a rusty, or well, with an enamel wash. I decided to try using this heavy enamel mud for the mud effects because I never have before. It didn't work, it didn't create texture, it took 2 days to dry, and I'm not saying I didn't use it incorrectly. I probably used it incorrectly, this isn't how it's supposed to be used, but it hindered the working time on this thing, so I was a little disappointed with it, and lately I've been realizing I might want to go back to acrylics for the entire weathering charade, but I will see that in the future. I did it all around where I would expect the mud to collect, so underneath mudguards and stuff like that, but as I mentioned, it didn't even create texture there. With that knowledge, in my brain now. I simply added my personal favorite Viejo acrylic mud everywhere, where I added this one to create the texture that I wanted. Even between the tracks. On the tracks I added it between the links, and then I went with my finger over it to clean up the mud where I didn't want it, basically, which is exactly where it would touch the ground, and therefore my finger. I then added a simple dusty enamel, and I blended it around to create a dusty streaking effect everywhere. Again, I blended it with a sort of, yeah, the odorless enamel thinner. It was also added on the upper parts of the vehicle to blend everything together, mainly on the mudguards underneath the turret ring, where I would expect dust to accumulate, and blend it around so it's not so harsh and it looks a little more realistic. Anyway, after adding this to the running gear and tracks as well, I could call the model finally finished. Well, the model is finally finished, and I must say I'm really happy with the result. Especially due to the rarity of the model. I have a few rare models in my stash, which I would love to build, but I'm really scared to, because while you're here, probably because you think differently, that's why you're subscribed or just watching this video in general, but I really doubt my general modeling skills. I never really feel confident in doing stuff, and then once I am done, I am surprised as to what kind of finish I managed to get from a model, and that this is actually in my skill set now. But yeah, I'm still gonna practice a little more before getting to those, especially the Shermans I mentioned. I'm gonna do a Sherman. I have Edward Shermans, which are, you know, quite rare kits. They were discontinued ages ago, so yeah, I wanna do justice to those kits for sure. Anyway, I'd like to know what you thought about this, I guess, pretty unique project. I know there's only one kit of the Super Pershing and it's in 35th scale, so yeah, I would love to know what you think down in the comments. If you would like to support me, subscribe, like, maybe join my Patreon, all of that jazz, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.